And joining me now is former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, author of Oath and Honor, a memoir and a warning. Congresswoman Cheney, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. Always great to be here.
Well, it's great to see you. Let's start right where I left off with House Speaker Mike Johnson. And I'll put it this way. President Biden has said that he doesn't know if there will be a peaceful transfer of power in 2025. You just heard how the House Speaker answered my questions about whether he would certify the election results. Do you have faith that this election will be free and fair and that there will be a peaceful transfer of power?
I do not have faith that Mike Johnson will fulfill his constitutional obligations. And if you just look at what he did in 2020, he knew, and he knew with specificity, that the claims of fraud that Donald Trump was making and that he was repeating, he knew those to be false. We had very clear and specific conversations about that. He knew that courts had specifically found that those claims were false. He knew they weren't true. He also knew that what he was urging Congress do in terms of throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, he knew with specificity that that was unconstitutional. He was told that not only in discussions with me, but also by the House Republican Counsel. He signed his name to a brief filed with the United States Supreme Court that made those claims he knew to be false. So he has a record repeatedly of doing things that he knows to be wrong, that he knows to be unconstitutional in order to placate Donald Trump. And frankly, you know, you saw that sycophancy just now on display. So I think that it's very concerning. I do think that Donald Trump has consistently said again and again and again, you know, in the last few months, that this election, you know, is going to be rigged, and that if he loses, that's why. So I think it's very important that that the Republicans not be in the majority in the House come January 2025.
And when it comes to the possibility of a peaceful transfer of power, are you optimistic that there will be?
Yeah, look, I think that Donald Trump is not currently in the White House, so he does not have the ability to exercise the control he did in 2020 and 2021. I hear repeatedly from people like Mike Johnson, like J.D. Vance, this claim that somehow we had a peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump sat and watched for over 3 hours while our Capitol was brutally attacked by a mob that he sent there, while police officers were brutally beaten, and Donald Trump refused to tell them to go home for over 3 hours. So anybody who is interested in the truth ought to go look at those videos. We did not have a peaceful transfer of power in 2021.
Just this week, Senator J.D. Vance was asked 5 different times if Donald Trump lost the election. He refused to say yes. Polls show that millions of Republicans share that same view. How do you really reach those voters, those Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kristen, when people write the history of this period, the Republican elected officials who know it's false, who continue to spread the lie, will be among those who are shown to just be really complicit in this attempt to unravel the republic. And so they are spreading this lie. They know it isn't true. If we are going to be a nation of laws, we abide by the rulings of the courts. And Donald Trump had the opportunity. 61 out of 62 courts ruled against him. And he was told repeatedly throughout this period that what he was saying was false. So the fact that now you've got the Republican Party, the leaders of the party who are in the grips of, you know, it seems to me just to be cowardice, that they are afraid of Donald Trump, but that they are willing to perpetuate his lies at the expense of their duty to the Constitution, tells you something about the real damage that's been done to the Republican Party.
You told my colleague Savannah Guthrie last year, quote, a vote for Donald Trump may mean the last election that you ever get to vote in. That is an incredibly dire warning. Congresswoman, what exactly did you mean by that?
You know, I think people really need to look very carefully at what Donald Trump will do if he were ever to be in the Oval Office again. The extent to which that, you know, and he has said repeatedly that, you know, he believes he will be immune. Certainly the Supreme Court ruling, whatever they thought they were doing, Donald Trump believes he will be immune for anything he does once he's in office. He will not respect the rulings of our courts. And people have to realize our courts can't enforce their own rulings. So if a president refuses to carry out his obligation to do so, then we are no longer a nation of laws. Donald Trump will ignore Congress. He will appoint people like Mike Flynn, for example, who just, 36 hours ago, Mike Flynn was at an event where he was asked whether or not the president's opponents should be executed. And he basically said, listen, yes, I'm going to unleash the gates of hell. These are the kinds of people that Donald Trump will be putting in place. The people that stopped him from his worst desires last time around won't serve again. So,
well, like Mark Milley comes to mind, who,
right.
according to Bob Woodward's new book, War, called him a fascist. Would you go that far as to call him a fascist?
Look, I have tremendous respect for General Milley, and I see no reason to disagree with that assessment.
I want to ask you about something Donald Trump said, the Donald Trump that the world got to know back in 2016. He was asked back then during a debate with Secretary Clinton whether he would accept the election results. Here's what he said.
One of the prides of this country is the peaceful transition of power, and that no matter how hard fought a campaign is, that at the end of the campaign, that the loser concedes to the winner. Are you saying you're not prepared now to commit to that principle?
What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well,
okay?
Chris, let me respond to that because that's horrifying.
Congresswoman, do you regret standing by him at the time and for all of those years after?
Yes, I do. And I think that, we've now actually seen him carry that out. And so for certainly people after what he did on January 6th to act as though you can have confidence in him, that simply is just not credible. The other thing I think people have to realize is what he did on January 6th, watching that brutal attack, that's depravity, and it's just also fundamentally cruel. It's the same kind of thing that drives him to lie to people about where they can get hurricane relief. I mean, think about the fact our fellow citizens are in dire straits. They're in dire needs. People's lives are at risk, and he's lying to them for his own political gain about where they can get relief. That kind of cruelty makes somebody unfit for this office.
And the Supreme Court has now ruled that he has immunity for official acts that were taken while in office. I'm curious, Congresswoman, do you still have faith and confidence in the Supreme Court?
Look, I think that the court took far too long to issue that ruling. I think that they should have taken this up when Jack Smith asked them to initially, and I think they got it wrong. And I think that Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, in the description that she gives of the danger that Donald Trump poses, she got it right. Now, I'm a conservative. I'm somebody who has supported those Supreme Court justices in the past. Many of them are friends of mine. Actually, Justice Kagan was one of my professors in law school, my favorite professor in law school. But I know the conservative justices, too. But I am deeply concerned about things like the role that Ginny Thomas played, and Ginny Thomas's continued refusal to say that she accepts the rulings of the courts. So, and I'm also concerned about, the flag flying upside down at Justice Alito's home. Yeah. I think that's indefensible.
Have you lost faith in them, though, Congresswoman?
I think it's very important that the court stand apart from politics. I do have some real concerns about recent activities and rulings, but I think we need our courts, both our Supreme Court as well as the lower courts, to play the kind of role that we've seen, frankly, the vast majority of judges play since January 6th.
Back in 2020, you said Kamala Harris, when she was announced as President Biden's running mate, you called her a radical liberal whose policies, quote, are completely inconsistent with what most Americans believe in and stand for. I know that you don't view this as a policy election. You've been very clear about that. But are there policies that Kamala Harris supports that you also back?
Absolutely. And I would say the extent to which, she and I certainly have had our disagreements. But when you look at the whole range of issues, for example, with respect to support for Ukraine, with respect to the fact that, she is saying that the United States has to lead in the world, Donald Trump is embracing tyrants. Donald Trump loves tyrants. He idolizes them. J.D. Vance and Donald Trump both support a very isolationist foreign policy and an erratic and a chaotic foreign policy that will leave us much less safe.
Do you regret any of the language that you used to describe Harris and Biden at the time? They would dismantle our freedom, destroy our history, the type of language you're using now about Donald Trump?
Look, I think certainly those were harsh things that I said. I think that they reflect absolutely that we had a policy disagreement on a series of issues. But I also think that's why it's so important for people to focus on the fact that I am supporting her now, and that there's such a broad coalition that's coming together to support her. And it's based in part on who she is, on the fact that she will lead with a sincere heart, on the fact that she is somebody who's dedicated her life to public service, and looking at what Donald Trump poses, the kind of chaotic, absolute depravity that he would bring if he were ever to be elected again.
Congresswoman, do you still consider yourself to be a Republican? And can you take us inside the conversation you had with your father when he decided to vote for Kamala Harris?
I'm a conservative.
Not are you a Republican?
I'm a conservative. I'm not a member of this, do not consider myself a member of Donald Trump's Republican Party. And, you know, my father and I speak every day, and he has really, you know, from the very beginning of this process, understood as much as I do, even more in the beginning, probably, the threat that Donald Trump poses. And so, you know, this was not any kind of a surprise. And look, I think the fact that it's not just him, but the numbers of, you know, senior officials, national security advisors, secretaries of defense that you have seen who served in the Trump administration who say this man is unfit. And Republicans can try all they want to get people to ignore that, to look away from that. But I think that's a very important thing for the voters to recognize.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, I know we'll be seeing a lot of you out on the campaign trail. Thank you so much for being here this morning on a very busy time for you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.